So here we go. While Marvel Studios was the first film studio with a full cinematic universe, Fox Studios holds a title of their own of being the first at. The first studio to have a big cinematic reboot movie. While other movies had continuity and then suddenly cut off that continuity, no studio, to my knowledge, I repeat, to my knowledge, has made an entire film whose sole purpose was just to reboot all the existing films and write a new continuity. Of course, if it was going to be any franchise outside of DC, it was going to be the X-Men with all their time traveling and off-world exploits. And yeah, it makes sense, especially with this storyline. So, yeah, here we go with X-Men Days of Future Past. In the future, the world has been taken over by the Sentinels, a group of robots designed to go out and hunt down mutants. With no hope of saving the current timeline, the only hope for the future of humanity, not just mutants, all humanity, is to send Wolverine back in time mentally to stop the assassination of Boulevard Trask, whose assassination springboards the entire Sentinel program. Now, to save everyone, Wolverine has to go back in time, help a jaded young Charles Xavier, and break Magneto out of prison in order to prevent Mystique from killing Trask. So, first off, there are a lot of changes from the original comic, but the basic framework is overall the same. The main change is who goes back in time and how. In the movie, they just say Kitty's powers evolved to allow her to phase through time as well as space to send Wolverine mentally back in time. It's really weird, and Kitty probably doesn't even have powers similar to this in the comics. But in the comics, it was actually Kitty herself who went back in time with the aid of Jean Grey's telekinetic powers. Telepathic powers. But considering the fact that Jean was super dead at this point in the series, and they didn't want to go through all that stuff to bring her back for this movie, I kind of get why they just skipped it. And yeah, some Wolverine, she entered her younger self to warn the present X-Men to stop Mystique from assassinating someone to save the world, essentially. Also, the assassination target was changed. In the comics, it was a senator with presidential aspirations who really hated mutants. Unfortunately, this character, Robert Kelly, was kind of out of the question as the target because he was a pivotal plot point in the first movie, as he was the senator that Magneto kidnapped and tested his whole mutation beam thing on. So, yeah, he couldn't be killed in the 70s if he was supposed to live to die later in the early 2000s. So, yeah, they kind of had to change the target. And it's fine to say that they were paying attention to their own continuity, because Boulevard Trask was an X3, but he wasn't he wasn't played by Peter Dinklage. He was played by a completely different person. Honestly, I'll let this slide considering the fact that Trask in X3 was more likely a reference to anything to actually do with the plot, and you wouldn't even noticed him unless you looked at a name tag. On top of that, there's something to say that he wasn't this Trask's son. Like maybe he has a son out there that was born before he was assassinated. We don't know. Also, yeah, this is just a reference similar to the Sentinel that did show up in the movies previously in Days Room in X3. You see how they like ignoring X3 so much? They continue pretending that X3 didn't happen, but I still like the movie despite its various flaws. And before we move on, let's talk about the whole Quicksilver conspiracy. I do like the name of that, the Quicksilver conspiracy. Basically, one of the best scenes in the movie is Quicksilver's time in the bottle scene. For those of you who haven't seen it, look it up. It's indeed a great scene, as well as some creative film work when it comes to portraying super speed. But anyway, originally the scene and the entire plot point of saving Magneto from the Pentagon involved using the Juggernaut, who in the comics is Charles Xavier's stepbrother. And honestly, would have probably been a bit of interesting to, explain that instead of him just showing up in X3 randomly. Again, they really love ignoring the fact that X3 was a thing. But because Marvel had planned to use the character of Quicksilver in Avengers 2, Fox decided to rewrite this chunk of the movie to basically one-up Marvel. And this is kind of why, despite him being super important, super useful, and, very, very useful, he's ultimately pushed out of the movie after they save Magneto with the excuse of it's too dangerous and he's too young. That you're trying to stop someone from getting killed, and you don't take the dude that you know has super speed and can just snag her and take her away from the area. You don't take him because he's too young. That is officially the dumbest thing you've ever done, Charles Xavier. And then there's the whole post-credit scene. So, in the climax of the movie, and mild spoilers, Wolverine was kind of pushed to the side and knocked unconscious, which forced his present self to travel to basically it forced the future persona to leave the current Wolverine's body to travel to the rebooted modern time. But the unconscious Wolverine was left kind of drowning in a lake. Well, not really a lake, just a pool of water pinned under some metal beam. But he was saved by Mystique at the very end of the movie, and she was in the glimpse of William Stryker, the guy who gave Wolverine his metal claws and experimented on him. I mean, this plot point could have been interesting if, Mystique wasn't the one to find him and it was actually for real Stryker. Considering the whole motivation and considering her whole motivation in this movie being her disdain for mutant experimentation, because that's what Trash used to perfect the Sentinels. And for those of you who are thinking, well, she saved Wolverine, so he wouldn't have the metal claws, metal skeleton, all that stuff that he would have later. Reboot and all that stuff. But no, in a later film, we find Wolverine post-experimentation in the whole Weapon X shirtless garb with with his classic metal claws. So that means Mystique, as Stryker, kidnapped Wolverine, took him to Weapon X, let the real Stryker use him and experiment on him, and just left. That makes no sense. But we'll just add that into the bucket of. Let's just add that to the thing. Let's just add that into the bucket of things that make no sense in this lot of the movie. Like, seriously, Kitty Pryde's powers make no sense about how they work in terms of this movie. And the whole timeline itself doesn't make any sense. Like, how does future Wolverine's persona continue to exist if that future never existed in the first place? Shouldn't it have been erased? You see what I mean by not a lot of this movie making any sense, and a lot of it being directly tied back to its time travel plot? Yeah, a lot of it makes no sense. In the comics, they kind of erased future Kitty from existence. And yeah, it still made no sense there, because how would she come back in time to warn them? And that's the problem with time travel plots. Overall, I have to say, this is an enjoyably dumb movie. Not a great one, but not really a bad one either. It's enjoyable. It's just used to go back to the 70s, and as a reboot for the whole series goes, it's pretty fine. If you're going to use any plot line to give a reboot to the X-Men series, it was going to be this one or another Phoenix issue. But they also say that First Class is also a result of a kind of ripple effect that happened through the time stream because of the stuff that happened here. But let's just forget that whole mess and just accept this as a dumb time travel movie. Also, let's enjoy the next upcoming dumb time travel movie with the whole DC Flashpoint thing that's coming up. Yep, those you don't know Flashpoint, get ready for another reboot! DC would have to do it eventually.